Let's begin with an introduction to evidence law. This is the foundation of our course and essential to understanding how cases are built and decided in courts. We're going to cover three major topics today: what evidence is, the objectives of evidence law, and an overview of the Federal Rules of Evidence, or FRE. Let's break these down one by one. First, what is evidence? In the simplest terms, evidence is the material presented in court to prove or disprove a fact. Think of it as the building blocks of a case. It's what attorneys use to support their arguments. Evidence can come in many forms, such as testimonies from witnesses, physical objects like a weapon, or documents like contracts or emails. For example, imagine a trial where someone is accused of theft. Witness who saw the theft happen would provide direct evidence. On the other hand, a surveillance video showing the suspect near the scene at the time of the theft might be considered circumstantial evidence. Both types are crucial in different ways, and we'll delve deeper into them as we move forward. Now let's talk about the objectives of evidence law. The goal here is twofold: fairness and efficiency. On the fairness side, evidence law ensures that trials are conducted justly. This means that only reliable and relevant evidence is admitted, while anything misleading or overly prejudicial is excluded. For example, evidence that unfairly biases the jury, such as unrelated past crimes, might be ruled inadmissible. On the efficiency side, the rules of evidence streamline the trial process. Without these rules, trials could drag on endlessly with irrelevant or repetitive evidence. So evidence law strikes a balance, allowing what's necessary while keeping out what's not. Finally, let's touch on the Federal Rules of Evidence, or FRE. These are the guidelines that determine how evidence is handled in U.S. federal courts. Think of them as the rulebook for presenting and evaluating evidence. FRE is divided into 11 articles, each focusing on a specific aspect of evidence law. For example, Article 1 lays out general provisions, such as the purpose and scope of the rules. Article 4 focuses on relevance. What makes evidence admissible or inadmissible? Article 8 deals with hearsay, one of the trickiest and most fascinating topics in this course. Throughout this course, we'll examine these articles in detail, using real-world examples to see how they're applied in courtrooms. That's an overview of what we'll cover today. We've introduced what evidence is, why the rules exist, and how the Federal Rules of Evidence are structured. In our next session, we'll dive deeper into the specifics of relevance and admissibility. But before we move on, do you have any questions about what we've covered so far? If you have any questions, post them in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps keep this channel up and running. Now let's dive into the heart of what evidence actually is. This is fundamental to everything we'll cover in this course, so let's break it down step by step. First, what is evidence? Evidence is material that's presented in court to prove or disprove facts. Think of it as the tools lawyers use to build their case. Without evidence, there's no way to support or refute claims in a trial. There are two main types of evidence: direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. Direct evidence is straightforward. It directly proves a fact. For example, if an eyewitness testifies that they saw a suspect commit a robbery, that's direct evidence. On the other hand, circumstantial evidence is indirect. It requires some reasoning to connect it to a fact. For example, if a suspect's footprints are found near the scene of the crime, that's circumstantial evidence. It suggests the suspect might have been there, but it doesn't directly prove it. Let's look at some common examples of evidence. Testimonies, like statements made by witnesses under oath, documents such as contracts, emails, or business records, physical objects like a weapon or a piece of clothing that connects someone to the crime. Each type of evidence plays a unique role in building a case, and understanding how they work together is key to mastering evidence law. So to recap, evidence is the foundation of any trial. It comes in different forms, direct or circumstantial, and can include testimonies, documents, or physical objects. In our next session, we'll start discussing what makes evidence admissible in court. Don't forget to post your questions in the comments section. Now that we understand what evidence is, let's talk about the objectives of evidence law. These are the guiding principles that ensure the legal system remains fair, efficient, and focused on justice. Let's break it down step by step. The first objective is ensuring fair trials. The rules of evidence help create a level playing field, ensuring that both parties, whether prosecution or defense, have an equal chance to present their case. For example, the exclusion of unreliable evidence prevents one side from gaining an unfair advantage with evidence that can mislead the jury. In essence, the rules protect the rights of all involved. The second objective is maintaining judicial efficiency. Without evidence rules, trials could easily spiral out of control with irrelevant or redundant information wasting time. The rules streamline the process, keeping the trial focused and preventing unnecessary delays. For instance, evidence that doesn't directly relate to the case at hand is often excluded to save time and resources. Next, the rules are designed to exclude evidence that is irrelevant, unreliable, or overly prejudicial. Why? Because not all information helps the jury arrive at the truth. For example, suppose a defendant's past unrelated actions are brought up in court. It might bias the jury unfairly, even if it has no relevance to the case. This is where evidence law steps in to ensure only useful and fair evidence is presented. Finally, evidence law strives to strike a key balance, allowing the jury to see the evidence necessary to make an informed decision, while protecting their integrity by filtering out anything that could confuse, mislead, or unfairly influence them. Think of it as a gatekeeper, opening the door to valuable evidence while shutting it on anything harmful to the process. The second objective is maintaining judicial efficiency. Without evidence rules, trials could easily spiral out of control with irrelevant or redundant information wasting time. The rules streamline the process, keeping the trial focused and preventing unnecessary delays. For instance, evidence that doesn't directly relate to the case at hand is often excluded to save time and resources. The FRE is organized into a series of articles, each addressing a specific aspect of evidence law. Let's look at a few key ones. Article 1, General Provisions. This article lays the groundwork for the entire rule book, explaining the scope and purpose of the rules. Article 4, Relevance and its limits. This is where we find guidance on what makes evidence admissible. Essentially, evidence must be relevant, and its probative value must outweigh any potential for unfair prejudice. Article 8, Hearsay, one of the most complex topics in evidence law. This article defines hearsay and outlines the numerous exceptions where hearsay might still be admissible. The purpose of the FRE is to promote consistency and fairness in trials. By following a unified set of rules, courts across the country can ensure that trials are conducted in a way that upholds the integrity of the legal process. These rules help judges and attorneys make informed decisions about what evidence should and should not be included in a case. In summary, the federal rules of evidence serve as the backbone of courtroom practice, governing the admissibility of evidence while promoting fairness and consistency. As we move forward in this course, we'll explore specific articles in detail and see how they're applied in real-world scenarios. Any questions? Post them in the comment section. we're going to look at the roles of judges and juries in a trial. These two entities play distinct but complementary roles in ensuring justice is served. Let's break this down into 3 parts: the role of judges, the role of juries, and how they collaborate. Let's start with the judges. Judges act as the gatekeepers of evidence. They decide what evidence can be presented during the trial by applying the federal rules of evidence. Their role includes ruling on admissibility. Judges determine if evidence is relevant, reliable, and not overly prejudicial. For example, if one side presents evidence that could confuse the jury more than it helps, the judge can exclude it. Overseeing pretrial motions, judges handle motions like motions in limine, which request the inclusion or exclusion of specific evidence before the trial begins, ensuring fairness. Above all, the judge's role is to maintain a fair and orderly trial. Next, let's talk about juries. Unlike judges, juries don't rule on the admissibility of the evidence. Instead, their role is to evaluate the evidence that's been admitted and decide the facts of the case. For example, jury listens to witness testimonies and determines how credible they are. They review physical evidence and decide how much weight it carries in proving or disproving a claim. In essence, juries are the fact finders. They're the ones tasked with determining what actually happened based on the evidence presented. Now, how do judges and juries work together? The judge sets the stage by ensuring that only admissible evidence reaches the jury. Once the evidence is in their hands, the jury interprets it to arrive at a verdict. This collaboration is essential. Judges ensure the process is fair and follows the law, and juries bring their collective life experiences and common sense to weigh the facts and determine the truth. In summary, judges and juries have distinct yet complementary roles. Judges handle the legal framework while juries focus on the facts. Together, they ensure that trials are both fair and effective. In our next session, we'll start discussing the different types of evidence and their admissibility. Any questions before we move on? Let's explore the categories of evidence, the concept of admissibility, and the important criteria of relevance and probative value. These are foundational principles that determine how evidence is evaluated and used in court. Evidence can generally be divided into 4 types. Real evidence, physical objects presented in court. For example, a knife used in a crime or a piece of clothing tied to a suspect. Demonstrative evidence, visual aids like charts, maps, or diagrams that help explain other evidence. For instance, a diagram showing how a car accident occurred. Testimonial evidence, statements made by witnesses under oath. These could be eyewitness accounts or expert opinions. Documentary evidence, written or recorded items such as contracts, emails, or surveillance footage. Each type of evidence serves a different purpose, but they all work together to paint a complete picture for the judge or jury. Next, let's talk about admissibility. Not all evidence can be presented in court. Only admissible evidence makes it in. To be admissible, evidence must meet specific criteria. Relevance. Does it make a fact more or less likely to be true? Reliability. Can it be trusted? For example, scientific evidence must be supported by proven methods. Legality. Was it obtained lawfully? Evidence gathered in violation of someone's rights, like an illegal search, may be excluded. Judges play a critical role here, acting as gatekeepers to ensure only admissible evidence reaches the jury. Finally, let's discuss relevance and probative value, which are key factors in determining admissibility. Under FRE 401, evidence is considered relevant if it makes a fact more or less likely to be true. For instance, if a fingerprint is found at a crime scene, that's relevant. It connects a suspect to the location. However, relevance alone isn't enough. Evidence must also pass the FRE 403 balancing test, which weighs probative value against potential prejudice. For example, a gruesome photo might be relevant, but if it's too shocking or emotional, it might unfairly bias the jury and be excluded. Finally, let's discuss relevance and probative value, which are key factors in determining admissibility. Under FRE 401, evidence is considered relevant if it makes a fact more or less likely to be true. For instance, if a fingerprint is found at a crime scene, that's relevant. It connects a suspect to the location. However, relevance alone isn't enough. Evidence must also pass the FRE 403 balancing test, which weighs probative value against potential prejudice. For example, a gruesome photo might be relevant, but if it's too shocking or emotional, it might unfairly bias the jury and be excluded. Let's dive into practical examples to better understand how admissibility, relevance, and probative value play out in courtrooms. Scenario 1, a physical object as evidence. Facts. A knife was found near the scene of a crime. It matches the general description of the weapon used in the attack, but there are no fingerprints on it. The prosecution wants to admit the knife into evidence. Analysis relevance, FRE 401. The knife is relevant because it could connect the suspect to the crime. Probative value versus prejudice, FRE 403. While the knife has probative value, its admission may prejudice the jury if it cannot be conclusively linked to the suspect. The judge might admit it with a cautionary instruction to the jury to weigh its significance carefully. Facts. A witness claims to have overheard the defendant confess to the crime in a phone call. The defense objects arguing it's hearsay. Analysis, relevance. The testimony is relevant because it directly supports the prosecution's case. Hearsay, FRE 801. The statement is hearsay unless it falls under an exception. For example, an admission by a party opponent is not considered hearsay, FRE 801D2. Now, let's review some key case law that has shaped the interpretation of admissibility under FRE 401 and 403. Case 1, Old Chief v. United States, 1997. Facts, the defendant was charged with illegal possession of a firearm. The prosecution wanted to introduce evidence of the defendant's prior felony conviction to establish an element of the crime. The defense offered to stipulate to the fact of the felony to avoid prejudice. Holding, the Supreme Court held that the trial court abused its discretion by admitting detailed evidence of the prior felony when the defendant offered to stipulate. Key principle: when the risk of prejudice substantially outweighs the probative value, courts must consider less prejudicial alternatives. Facts. The plaintiffs alleged that a drug caused birth defects. The defendants challenged the admissibility of expert testimony supporting the claim, arguing the methodology was unreliable. Holding, the Supreme Court established the Dober standard for evaluating the reliability of expert testimony under FRE 702. Judges must act as gatekeepers to ensure scientific evidence is relevant and reliable. Key principle: reliability and relevance are critical for expert evidence to be admissible. Class discussion: why is the judge's gatekeeping role essential in cases involving scientific evidence?